So what we're going to get into in this lesson is adding transitions between clips. I have two clips here on the timeline with both audio and video, and without any transition it's what's called a cut. That's an abrupt change between the black here and then between the audio and video itself. You can see as I'll play this right now. That was just a bit of a abrupt change here. Also at the end of the clip the same thing happens as we transition out of the clip and into the black. It's just a very abrupt. Now most of the time cuts are very good. There's no need to put a transition on every time there's a change between clips or between a clip and black, but sometimes adding these transitions will smooth out this type of thing. So what we're going to do here is to add the transition, and there's several different methods. Now the simplest way to add a transition is just to move the mouse over the end of the clip here and then right click and choose Apply Default Transitions. Now the reason it's going to apply two transitions is this is a linked clip. If we select the video, we get the audio. If we select the audio, we also get the video because these clips are linked together. And I'm going to jump back here, and you'll notice how this 1 second dissolve and also audio fade softens the transition moving into this shot. Again, let's look at it without. I'm going to click on the transitions and delete them. And then let's play it without the transition, just a cut. And then let's add the transition back and show the difference. Now the opposite also works. When you come from black and you go into a clip, it's just a fade up. And when you come out of a clip and go into black, it's just a fade out. So let's do the same thing here. Right click, apply the transitions, and let's do the dissolve out. Nice. And if we remove the transition and play, there's a cut. A little abrupt there. Put the transition back in, and we get a nice fade. Okay. Now, what makes these transitions the default transitions? Any transition that's available inside of Premiere can be set as the default. From the factory, the two default transitions are a constant power for an audio transition and a simple cross dissolve, where one image fades into another as the video transition. But any other transition can be added as the default transition. If we come down here and do something like a cross stretch, if we right click on it and select it as the default transition for video, now when we come here and apply a default transition, the transition will be different. It will be the cross stretch. But as you can see, that's not totally appropriate for every situation, so the cross dissolve is a more generic and more universally useful default transition, so we're just going to stick with that. So I've gone over now what a fade up and a fade out looks like by just placing the transitions on the end of clips as they transfer out of black and then into black. But let's look at what transition between two clips looks like. So let's put these clips together to create an edit point. The edit point is where the transition happens from one clip to another, and with no transition it's simply a cut, simply an abrupt change from one to the next. So you can notice both the picture and the audio do a very abrupt change as they cut from one clip to another. Okay, now we can add a transition here, but there's some special considerations when going from clip to clip, and I'll show you that in just a second. When we do apply the default transitions, they say there's insufficient media. The transition will contain repeated frames. So if we say OK to that, it will create a transition for us, but you'll see it freezes part of the video. Just notice in the outgoing clip there was a freeze. Let's watch it again. Watch how the surf freezes just for a second as the transition happens. There you go. What you should do when you're using transitions between clips and you want it to be smooth, let's go ahead and click on this transition and go into the effects controls. And you'll see the transition has these lines through it. That's telling you that a freeze frame is happening. What normally has to happen when you're doing transition between two clips is you need to have what's called handles. That's extra frames that's available after the out point of the outgoing clip, and then before the end point of the incoming clip. So let's double click and load up the outgoing clip into the source window, and you'll see that its out point is all the way at the end of the media. There's no extra frames to create a dissolve with. So if we want to create a 30 frame or 1 second dissolve, we need to move this back about 15 frames. So let's bring the CTI to the end of the clip, and then we'll say minus on the keyboard 15 frames, enter, and then set a new out point. Now when we set that new out point, we'll notice it's reflected down here in the timeline. But again, we have to do the same thing on the other side of the transition. So let's double click this. Again, the transition starting right at the beginning of the media. There's no extra frames, so let's move there and add 15 frames in, and again set a new endpoint. Again, this is reflected down here in the timeline. So then we need to put these two shots back together. I'm going to delete that audio transition as well, and I'm going to select this black area and delete that to put the two clips back together again. And then now when we come in here and click and apply the default transitions, no warning comes up, and it's a nice smooth transition between the two. And you'll notice that the video in the surf and the outgoing clip continues to play smoothly during the transition. There's no freeze all the way through. Now if we click on that transition again and go back to our effect controls, you'll see now there's no lines that are happening between the two clips, because there are available handles that allow us to be able to create that transition smoothly. Now I'm going to just zoom in a little bit here on these transitions and show you a couple different ways we can modify them. First of all, the default duration for any transition is set to 1 second, because American TV is standard at 30 frames per second. So if we come up here and go to our preferences, we can change that if we like. If we look here, the video default transition duration is 30 frames, which is 1 second in American television. The audio default duration is 1 second. If we want to change that, we can do that here. Say if we wanted 15 frames here to be our standard length of our transition as we apply them. If we wanted to match that, we could do 0.5 seconds or half a second for audio transitions. Now if we say OK, this is only going to be applied to the transitions we do from now on. It does not affect the transitions that are already on the timeline. So I'm going to go back and set this back to 1 and this back to 30, and I'm going to say OK. Alright. Now we can change the duration of a transition by right clicking on it, set the transition, and typing a new transition in here. We can double click it, and it would also bring up that same. We can also do the same thing with the audio. Okay, so we can change the length of those. We can grab an edge here and we can extend the transition this way or shorten it, and the same thing with the audio. We can also accomplish this in the effects panel. If we select a transition and go to the effects controls, we have the same type of ability here. Now if we stretch it beyond the handles that we have, remember we have 15 frames on the outgoing clip and 15 frames on the incoming clip, again we're going to see this stripes happen, and at that point the top video will freeze at a certain point. It still allows you to do the transition, it just freezes that video there. And you just barely saw the freeze as it was fading out to nothing. So that was kind of okay. So that's a good thing that Premiere does, is allow you to do that. But you just need to be aware that if you're getting that warning or you're seeing those stripes show up in your effects window, that there's a freeze happening on your transition there. Now, in addition to modifying how the transition falls, we can change the transition. Once we have the default duration there is 30 seconds, we can change the transition. So if I go with something like a cross stretch and just drop that on top of the transition that we already have, it just becomes the cross stretch transition. Now if we change the duration of this to 15 frames, let's say, so it's a shorter transition. A little abrupt there, but let's go back to the cross dissolve, and all we have to do is just grab the dissolve and drop it right on top of the one there, and notice it maintains the same 15 frame duration. So there you go, and you can change that to any transition at all. Now what we're going to do here too is we're just going to take a look at a wipe and drop that on there. And that's a little abrupt, so let's double click and change the duration back to 30. And we're going to take a look at what we can do to modify transitions beyond just the duration and what type of transition we're using. If I click on this again here, this will show up in the effects controls. I'm going to scroll down here and we'll see some different parameters that we can apply. Okay, not all transitions have these, but some transitions have a lot of extra parameters that you can affect. But what we can do here is I'm going to just park it about halfway through here. And what we can do is we can add a border if we like. And let's make it a little thicker so we can see it better. Let's put it at about 25. And it doesn't have to be black. We can change the color here to just about anything we want. Let's go with a nice sort of blue there. We can also reverse the transition. Notice we're going from left to right here. We can just click the reverse button and go in the opposite direction. Okay. And as far as the color goes, we can also use the color picker to pick up a color from either part of this video. So if we click this here and we want to pick up something from, say, the sky, let's say, or the green of this foliage, now we get a nice border on the transition. Okay, and so you might need to experiment by just trying some different transitions here and there, and then also scroll down here in the effects controls by just clicking on the transition and going to the effects controls and seeing what the different parameters are that you can add to a transition. I just want to go over one more situation as regards to transitions. There are certain times where you put a whole bunch of shots together and then you decide that you might need to add a transition between all of the shots here. In this production, there's several very nice shots. I'm going to mute this music and voiceover track just so you can concentrate on the actual shots themselves. But as you see, this is just a quick cut. Now it does work as cuts, but it's just a little bit jarring. So what we're going to do here is just go ahead and add the default transition to all of these shots. So let's just go ahead and select all of the shots in the entire 2-minute production. Then we're going to come up here to sequence. And under here we can apply the video transition, audio transitions, or the default transition if we have linked selections. Now these pieces of media, these video shots are not linked to the audio. This is a voiceover track here, and the one down below is a music track, so there's no video and audio linking. So all we need to do is go to apply the video transition, and what it will do is it will apply whatever is the default transition. Now the effects transition set to default right now, as we've discussed this before, is the standard dissolve transition. See, this one is cross dissolve. So when we come up here and go sequence, apply video transition, And with one click, we've now put a transition even at the beginning where it's a fade up and at the end is a fade out. And between every clip, there's now a 30 frame dissolve transition. And as you can see, it makes for a little bit nicer flow, and especially when you add the voice and music back in and mute those.
The bald eagle is the only eagle unique to North America. In the late 20th century, the bald eagle was on the brink.
So there we have it. So that's just one way to add the transitions to an entire group of clips when the situation calls for it.